So Lonnie, these are replica pots that were made here today as part of this whole experiment, but this isn't your first time making replica pots based on the finds from Killaclohane. You did it back in 2016, 2017. So how did you start? How did you go about making replicas of these?
Well, first finding out exactly what shape was used at that time and how to match it up to the shards that were found in the tomb. And to find out what kind of clay, what thickness, and what did it look like. Was there any inclusions in the clay to match it up? So we took tests from the ground here, just this clay here, to see was there any chance they might just simply have dug out clay locally. That was a match the first time. And all I needed to do was just wet it down, take out stones and grass out of it, and it was workable. Next thing was the big challenge was to make the round bottom pots. All the pots were round bottomed at the early Neolithic, as far as I understand from the archaeologists. So how to make a round bottom pot was the biggest challenge about making them the first time. And so we gathered that they must have built them into something that it was round already. What that was, I don't know for sure, but the round bottom could have been inspired by round baskets, I suppose, because that's another material that I'm being told that were in use. So they could have built them into a basket, for example, or maybe another pot that had been made to hold the round shape. So I used some rounded pots to build them into first of all. And then it's a very slow process then of building up the sides, because the clay that you dig up here is quite rich in small little roots, and there's a lot of organic material in it, and that means it's very, very slow drying. And it's very hard to thin it down, so you have to work very slowly. With a bit of practice, it was possible. At the start I thought it couldn't be this clay they have used. But once I kind of slowed down the process and figured out how to do it, it worked okay. And once we have it fired up, we could see that it looked well, I think that you were happy it looked like the
colour
same.
And the inclusions was very similar,
But it was a long process even to get to the point of concluding that. Because I suppose the possibility was that they could have taken the clay from a deposit somewhere else. Or the pots, what do you think? Would you have thought maybe the pots could have been produced somewhere else altogether?
You would expect they'd be produced reasonably locally, but the clay could have been taken from 2 kilometres away. It could have been taken from here. You were saying earlier that thinning the pots to the kind of thickness that we found in the shards here, which was kind of 5-6 millimetre, that was the hardest part, the slowest part.
Very, very hard. To do that would have taken a lot of patience. And being very, very methodical about it, and knowing exactly what you're doing. Because if it's a little bit too wet, it won't hold itself up at that thinner wall. It'll just kind of collapse because it's too soggy if it's too wet. And if it's got a little bit too dry, it cracks when you try to scrape it down. So you have to build it up fairly thick and then scrape it down at specifically the right time, very carefully.
Before it's fired?
Before it's fired, while it's what you call leather hard, which would be in between soft plastic and dried out clay at a specific time. So it would be it's a great skill for them to be able to build pots of that size, that thinly, of that clay. Not only the organic materials, the stony little inclusions of different rocks. There's a lot of mica and quartz
fragments.
That also makes it a little bit harder to work with. Another interesting thing that I saw in the archaeological report, the outside had been treated with a clay wash afterwards, which from what I've heard otherwise about Neolithic pottery, that a lot of it is being polished up with a smooth stone to make it tighter. It's because of all the grainy material of stones, it becomes quite coarse and an open material. So to close off the surface to make it more watertight and more suitable for food storage, they would try to seal the surface somehow. And that typically would have been done with a polishing stone, which I tried as well. But it was impossible for me to do, no matter what rock I got, how smooth it was. I couldn't use that method on this clay because of all the inclusions, all the little stone. They just got dragged along.
Dragged across it.
But a clay wash, which is just watered down clay, painting that on the outside is what actually these shards were found with, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and this would work to kind of make it more watertight, as you say.
And that it makes sense then in my experience as well that you couldn't have sealed the surface in any other way.
Okay.
You couldn't use the polishing stone method on this clay.
Okay.
So it makes sense that they use the clay wash instead to kind of smooth the surface.
Seal it up. And when it came to firing these, Lonnie, you've pit fired them, and it was the same the last time, the first time you tried to make replicas. And how has this worked out? Does it produce a pot that's usable?
It has. The higher temperature that we reach, the stronger the pots will be as an end product. And we managed to reach quite a high temperature by using hardwood. I presume they would have had access to oak, for example, oak wood.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe, can you tell me other ways they would be able to reach a higher temperature?
They might have used charcoal. They might have used, made charcoal to reach higher temperatures. But as you say, there would have been no shortage of oak. Oak wood would have reached particularly high temperature. They may have sealed the pits with clay to allow it to smoulder over a longer period of time, which also would help you reach a higher temperature. But the pots that were made in just these open firings, they've been reasonably stable when they came out. They've been reasonably well fired.
It totally depends on the temperature reached inside. So I'd expect temperatures of maybe 500, 600, 700 degrees in a fire like this. And if we had more time, and if we had something like charcoal maybe, and if we'd had more time, kept it going for longer, put on more material, we might have come up to 1,000. And then you're onto an even stronger pot. But the higher temperature and the longer,
the stronger the pot.
The stronger they are. But they would be quite usable even at the 600, 700 degrees.
And these pots would have been used not just to be put in burials like in the tomb, but they would have been domestic use as well. Yeah. And you think that in general these pots fired in this method would be suitable for?
They would absolutely, And actually the interesting thing about storing food in pots like these that are porous, so they would be porous pots.
Yes.
So the clay hasn't fused into like stoneware.
Yes.
That's up to 1200 degrees or so. You could get some clays could fuse into become like watertight material, but it's a porous material. But porous material, food storage, actually when you put food in it that contains fat, the fat helps tighten the pot.
Yes.
So after one use of anything with any kind of animal, or it could be dairy fat in it, the pot would become watertight because of the having been used with something fatty in it.
That's interesting because as far as I know, analysis of shards, not from here, but from other excavations in Britain and Ireland, have shown that in analysing pottery fragments, they found lipids and fats in the fragments, which suggest that they did hold food or drink that had been cooked. So it's possible that even the pots here were possibly used for something like that in a domestic context before being put in, or even that they held offerings of food of that type when they were placed in the tomb.
Yes, It could be either that they, I suppose that they had happened to use it for food, but they could have deliberately.
Absolutely, yeah.
They could deliberately been using it or been smearing some fat on them.
Yeah. To actually achieve the tightening that you're talking about. Yeah.
That you do that to this day sometimes.
Okay.
With porous pots, with earthenware.
Earthenware.
You could advise people to say, if your pot is leaking, maybe try with a little bit of time.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the landscape here when those original pots were made at that time. How different did it look? Because when I was digging into the ground and I'm just wondering, taking out the roots of the stones and wondering, is this the exact same material as it would have been then, or is it different? I mean, it wouldn't have been looking, I suppose, would have been.
Well, it wouldn't have been open farmland like this. It would have been forest. It would have been primeval forest, predominantly oak, but also species like ash, elm, hazel, things like that. Yeah. So it would have been woodland. It would have been quite dense. So you would have had even a bigger root problem, if you like. Yeah. But maybe because of the tree cover, not as much weed and grass roots as larger tree roots would be easier to extract from the soil.
Almost like.
So because it's like even Killaclohane wood over the way here, Where the tree cover is quite dense, you don't get that overgrowth on the soil. The soil is very often quite bare, and it's the tree roots would be more an issue, but they'd be easier to remove from the soil before you use it.
It might have been easier to dig than it is here today, actually. But the material would have been the same, the same rocks in
the basal clay would be, the basal clay is basically a boulder clay, and it would be much the same.
Have we any idea who made the pots at the time?
I mean, the pots.
Do we know anything?
The pots were made by whoever built the tomb. There's, and put the first burials in the tomb. There's absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, there is a settlement here somewhere. I mean, the pots may have been made specifically for the burial, or they may have been pots that were in use in a settlement and were subsequently used in the burial. Either case is equally valid, but there's no doubt they were made by clay from the locality somewhere. I mean, what you've done here suggests it may even be as close as this to the tomb. But they were made by the people who were the first to use the tomb, the probable builders of the tomb.
How do you think they learned to do it? Do you think they learned from somebody coming into the area? Is it? If it's the same all over the country?
That's the most likely scenario, because they basically come with agriculture. There is no pottery in Ireland prior to the arrival of agriculture, so it is the earliest pottery across Western Europe, and it seems to come with agriculture. So it's possible that the ability to make the pottery travelled from east to west, the same as knowledge of agriculture travelled from east to west, and that it is the influence of newcomers into the country who also brought agriculture with them.